Welcome back, everyone, to the GDFL podcast. It is being hosted by yours truly, the Commissioner, Andrew Korn. And this week, I did not have any guests sign up, but I wanted to try something on my own. I've long wanted to see, is this something I could talk about for a while by myself? I already know the answer is yes, but I'm just curious to see how long I could record a podcast on my own, just talking about this Dynasty Fantasy Football League. And, I probably could talk well beyond the length of the Zoom call that you can have, which is 40 minutes. But here we are. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm recording this in the middle of the day on Wednesday. I'm having a little bit of a lighter day at work. And then just of like plans I have for the next couple days, don't really know when else I'm going to get time to record this. And I still want to record an episode this week. So let's get into it. So this week it was a pretty pivotal week for I think a lot of teams. I'll start at the top of the matchups here. I played against Chaz and I squeaked out a win 128 to about 121. Chaz had about a 50-50 shot going into Monday Night Football. He needed Wandale and Pat Fryermuth to combine for about 16 points. Wasn't able to do so this week, but CeeDee Lamb victimized me again. I think the last two times I've faced Chaz this week and then the championship, he has put up 35 points on me both times. So I'm ready for him not to go off against me, which I'm against Chaz again in week 14 right before the playoffs, which should probably be a pretty big matchup for seeding, given that we are currently first and second in the standings. Up next, we have Sokol versus Logan, and Sokol is the highest score of the week, pulling out a 144 to 123 win. I think this was a pretty important win for Sokol, just to get his season back on track. If I remember correctly, his strength of schedule looked pretty tough the rest of the way. So, I mean, he'll have to keep churning out wins here. I think, like I've said in previous weeks, I think around 7-7 is probably all you need to make the playoffs this year. And so, I mean, if Sokol can go 4-2 down these last 6 weeks, I think he has a pretty good shot at making it. And then for Logan, looks like Jordan Love may be injured again, but this is honestly a pretty respectable showing for his team. I don't think they can be too upset with the week where you score 123. Up next, we have the Grand Traverse Holsteins led by Levi against Stun, with Levi pulling off the 134 to 127 win. This was a pretty big win for Levi. He's actually now 7-1 against the median, but only has a 4-4 record to show for it. And then Stun got somewhat unlucky in this one with George Pickens having 2 touchdowns called back, especially that second one he had called back where his left foot tapped in the end zone twice. I learned something new that having the same foot down twice does not count as 2 feet in. So that was something new I learned about football rules this week. I'm sure a lot of you did as well. But I think this was a pretty important win for the Holsteins just to get back in the playoff picture. I can't remember if he was sixth or he moved back up to sixth. But overall, it was a good week for the Holsteins. And then Stun got to finally hit the loss column for the first time in a while. I mean, I still like Stun's team. I still think his team's good. I didn't think it was as good as a 6-1 record would indicate. But I mean, Stun should pretty comfortably still be making the playoffs at this point. Up next, we have Jake taking on Ryan, with Jake pulling out a 138 to 116 victory. Again, similar to Sokol, this was a much needed victory for Jake. His team had really been scuffling for a little bit, and then he finally got back in the win column. And I mean, I think a loss this week would have effectively ended his season. But I mean, there's still some glimmers of hope, although it's going to be his depth is really going to be tested here these next couple of weeks with Christian Kirk now out for the season and another week of JMO being suspended, and plus whatever happens up with this gun incident. I don't think anything's going to happen personally. I don't think any law was necessarily violated. It just, I mean, he got away with not being brought into a prosecutor's office because he plays for the Lions. And most cops are probably football fans and could recognize JMO, especially with a name like Jameson Williams. I can't imagine there's too many people named Jameson Williams in the city of Detroit. So good week for Jake. Ryan with a loss. More than just losing in this matchup, he lost Stephon Diggs with a torn ACL out for the season. And he was in a contract year this year, and this really makes me wonder if this is the end of Stephon Diggs. I mean, I think he's still going to be in the league next year. but coming off a torn ACL, he's already 31. He'll be 32 next year coming off that ACL injury. I'm just not really sure how much more fantasy relevancy he's going to have left in his career. I mean, Stephon Diggs, if we had made a fantasy Hall of Fame, Stephon Diggs, with the way he's been playing for the last 7, 8 years now, would probably go into a fantasy Hall of Fame. And maybe that's an idea I can explore on a future podcast. But yeah, tough loss for Ryan. He falls to 5-3 after starting 5-1, and really doesn't seem to be in any kind of motivation to use some of that draft capital to help him now that he's been building up. I think that's something he absolutely could have and maybe should have done 2 weeks ago. When you start 5-1, I mean, you can change your own luck. I mean, last year I started 5-0 with a team I didn't think was very good, and then decided to change my luck by buying pieces like Brees Hall and Mike Evans. But I mean, to each their own. Ryan doesn't want to commit into this season, even though he's still in the playoff picture. It feels very reminiscent of where Beans was last year, where Beans was in the playoff picture, but didn't really want to make the playoffs and decided to sell off. So we'll see what Ryan does. Don't really think this week necessarily changes the outlook of a season. But again, I've looked at his schedule. I've looked at everyone's schedules a little bit. And I think Ryan had one of the easier schedules left in the league. So he might be making the playoffs whether he wants to or not. Up next, we have Mark versus Beans. Mark coming out with a 129-116 victory. This was a pretty big win for Mark here. It helps. I mean, I think Mark has one of the best teams in the league, especially now that Tua's back. He has two healthy and functioning quarterbacks. I mean, his running back room with Gibbs and Henry and Kyron is absolutely filthy. I mean, those three are putting up like 60 points on a regular basis just from between the three of them. Even with Mahomes being a bit of a dud for fantasy right now, I still really like Mark's team. I think his receiver core is very strong with London, DK, Debo. And Andrews has honestly been fine after those first like 4 weeks where he was kind of being slowly eased back into things. And then, yeah, Beans falls to 3-5. Uh, Beans has not acquired a second quarterback yet. He was starting Fields, and then Fields got benched. And then Will Levis is also, he's been benched because he's been hurt. Not benched, he's injured. And so he's not had a field a second quarterback. He's someone who's had some excess draft capital who I thought maybe should have made a move for someone like Jameis Winston. Someone in the short term who can just help win a few games, like maybe if you aim to make the playoffs. Don't really know if Beans is aiming to make the playoffs though, but Josh Downs has been very, very good for Beans. That's looking like a great pick. Same with Chase Brown from last year. Both those guys have had pretty good years so far. And then Nick Chubb's back, and he seems to be healthy for the first time in, I mean, a year, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I think Beans' team has been pretty solid. It just might not be quite a playoff team, but I don't really think that's Beans' goal necessarily. But I think he'll take wins where he can get them. And then lastly, this matchup down here, we have Trevor beating Barbara by a score of 129-126. Barbara held a very narrow lead over Trevor going into the late stages of Monday Night Football. But a last-minute drive led by Daniel Jones, he fed Malik Neighbors just enough times to give Trevor the win. Obviously, a pretty crushing defeat for Barb. You don't want to lose to the worst team in the league. That's one you should really be looking at your schedule, and then it should be a kind of a gimme for you. But the fact that it wasn't is kind of a pretty big loss. I'm not going to complain. Just the way fantasy goes sometimes. But yeah, what a great win for Trevor. And he's got 2 on the year now, which is 2 more than he was hoping to have when the season started. And yeah, I mean, Trevor's team is still looking like it's in a pretty solid position to earn the 101 here. But then, yeah, for Barb, Barb's got a pretty good running back room, but like that receiver room was looking very strong at the start of the season on paper. And it's really maybe not as strong as we once thought. Like Puka's still a fucking stud. He looked incredible in that Thursday night game. Garrett Wilson's been fine. But then, yeah, with Ayuk's injury and Tank Dell just regressing a ton, Tank Dell looks to be on a similar trajectory that Elijah Moore was on, where he showed flashes in like an 8-game stretch in his rookie year, but hasn't been quite able to pull it together. There's still plenty of time for Tank Dell to turn around, especially with Diggs' injury. Like, there's really no excuse for Tank Dell not to be producing now. We'll see what happens. Nico Collins is expected to come back in week 10. So this might be a good chance for Tank Dell to just like redo or have a redo of the last few weeks and maybe start to show some a little bit more on the field. Then taking a look at our standings. So we have Chaz in first place, tied with both me and Stun. Stun's a little bit further back of the points tiebreaker. But nonetheless, there's three teams tied at 6-2 right now. And I think Mark at 5-3 is also very much in contention for a bye at this point. We'll see what happens. There's still almost half a season, or a little less than half a regular season left. It's crazy how fast it's gone by. At 5-3, we have both Mark and Ryan. I talked about Mark just now. How I think he could absolutely be in contention for a bye. I really don't think Ryan will be. He could, but I think his schedule it doesn't have that many teams with winning records left on it. So like Ryan absolutely could climb and be a surprise contender. But we'll see what happens. Losing Diggs is a pretty big blow. And then Zay Flowers might be taking a little bit of a downgrade here with Deontay Johnson being traded to the Ravens. We got Levi is the only team at 4-4 right now. Like I've mentioned before, it looks like he has 0.04 points more than Ryan this year too, which is kind of fascinating. One more thing on Ryan's team. He's been riding Kareem Hunt, and that's been honestly working for him. Was probably gonna be the best waiver claim of this season, unless there's something that comes in the works later in the year. But yeah, Kareem Hunt's been pretty solid for him. Probably going to lose some value here soon. I don't really know when Pacheco's coming back, but I think he's probably coming back within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll see if Ryan will continue to ride Kareem Hunt. And then we'll see what he does after that. Because, yeah, no Kareem Hunt, no Diggs in the starting lineup. Might be starting guys like QJ and Slayton, maybe throwing in Jalen Wright or Zach Ertz, maybe. We'll see what happens. Yeah, talking about Levi's team. So Levi had a pretty big blow this week with Anthony Richardson getting benched. Richardson getting benched was kind of honestly a bit unfair to Richardson. I mean, the Colts took a developmental quarterback and then have just opted not to develop him for whatever reason. And so, I mean, Tom Brady said it in a podcast earlier this year. And really, NFL teams just aren't interested in developing quarterbacks anymore. And it's honestly something that's pretty sad to see. Like we've seen Bryce Young get yanked really quickly this season. Trey Lance has only made 3 starts in his career. I mean, the Jets pulled the plug on Zach Wilson after 2 seasons. Like teams are not really willing to give these quarterbacks a shot. And it really makes you wonder what's going on. I think some of it is that the college game offenses have been simplified a little bit. I mean, a lot of it's just like a one read or a scramble type of offense, which honestly what Jade Daniels is running in Washington, but it's worked really well for him. Uh, it's just, yeah, these maybe it's probably starting at the college level. Like teams just aren't running like NFL offenses anymore. Their teams aren't developing quarterbacks. I mean, the transfer portal quarterbacks are just coming and going. They're not really staying in a system and learning a system. And really, these teams don't have much of a chance to develop these quarterbacks because GMs and head coaches get fired like crazy. Owners are not patient enough to sit through a quarterback going through their growing pains. I couldn't find the chart for this podcast, but I was looking at one where like Anthony Richardson was being compared to other quarterbacks through their first 10 starts. And his completion percentage is abysmal. A lot of that is he does have a high ADOT, which is average depth of target, if you don't know that acronym. So he's been like chucking the ball downfield a little bit. So like that's going to be a cause for a lower completion percentage. But like I can't remember exactly what stat it was. I think it might have been EPA. But like I mean it was in the negatives. Like he's definitely not helping his team. But like it was still better than like where Josh Allen and Matt Stafford were through 10 career starts. And again, there's always going to be outliers. Is he ever going to be good? We don't really know, but the Colts aren't really giving him that shot. Anywho, that's a little bit of my ramble about NFL quarterback and team development. Wasn't sure if that was going to make it on the show or not, but here we are. Anyway, 3-5 teams. We've got Barb, we've got Jake, we've got Sokol, and we've got Beans. All 4 of these teams are currently separated by 19 points scored in the points for column. So it really won't be that hard for any of them to catch up to like that 5-6 spot. Like I said, once one of these teams just needs to go on like a 2 or 3 game win streak, they'll be very much in the thick of it. Like I said before, I think Ryan's team might continue to falter a little bit. Uh, that's might open up a playoff spot. I think the top three are pretty locked in at this point. I think Mark's also pretty locked in. So I think there's really about six teams or so fighting for the last two playoff spots, with Ryan and Levi having the edge. And I really think Shrew's team has a shot at it. I mean, he's got a really good running back room. Tyrone Tracy is starting to emerge as a pretty good running back. J.K. Dobbins is having a phenomenal bounce back season. Brian Robinson's been solid. Like, there's been a lot of good in Shrew's running back room. And I mean, Pollard was a nice acquisition. With Jake's team, I just don't know if this thing is sustainable for him. He's got very limited depth. He's the only his RB2 after Kamara is probably Kamani Vidal, maybe Craig Reynolds if you squint. This is RB3. It's not great. And then, like, I mean, Jamar Chase is a fucking stud. Cooper Cup's a stud. Kelsey's been better. Marv's been on the better track. Hurts is a stud. It's really hard for me to buy into Jake being a playoff team just with the state of his roster at the moment. I mean, I could be always proven wrong. Maybe Troy Franklin steps it up. He road trade Tucker for a little bit. Maybe he just keeps hitting the right buttons, but we'll see what happens. Sokol's a team where I still like Sokol's team. I think he's been a bit unlucky. I mean, really the big thing that's like hurt his season is Tyreek Hill has not been producing without Tua. Now that Tua's back, Tyreek is hopefully going to be fine. But I think that's been really like the biggest bump on Sokol right now is Tua got hurt and then just like completely ruined the Dolphins offense. David Montgomery's been fine. I think Olave's a pretty good receiver. Amon-Ra's taking a small step back, but I think a lot of that's just the Lions offense in general hasn't been passing the ball as much. I think they've been running the ball a little bit more. Kittle's by far the tight end one right now. Kittle's having a great season, and like Evan Ingram's still pretty good. Like I think Sokol's team has enough depth here to where I think it's fine overall. He's got Jacoby Myers and Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore with Jameis Winston might be a startable player. Like Shakir, I think is a pretty good receiver, and then like his quarterback room with Goff and Cousins, I think is just fine. Minshew's a quarterback three. We'll see how long that lasts. But with AOC being injured, I think Minshew's he's gonna have to have a long leash. But yeah, I mean, I think Sokol's team's fine. I think his schedule was a little bit tough. And like really looking at max points for, he's only 17 points behind the 102 right now. If Sokol sold off like two or three starters, I think Sokol really could make a push for the 101, not 101, but maybe 102. But we'll see. And then we have Logan in 11th and Trevor in 12th, both at 2 and 6. I don't really think there's much to be said here. Neither of these teams are particularly good, and I don't really think have much of a shot at making the playoffs. And I think both of them have pretty much indicated as such of some of the trades they've made. So then I've talked about the draft a little bit. I've decided to add a new column into our draft standings just to like see what the draft order actually looks like right now. So right now, Trevor would have the 101. Ryan by 2 points would have the 102 since he has Logan's pick. Beans would have the 103 because of Jake's pick, but again, there's really not much separating that pick between Logan and Jake right now, and neither of them really control their fate either. I don't think either of them are too motivated to do a massive sell-off. So we'll see what happens there. Sokol's at 4, but I think Sokol is very much in the thick of it. We got Beans at 5. I don't think Beans has much of a. I mean, Beans could definitely lower his points if he wanted to, but I think Beans is probably not a playoff team and just like might be locked into that like 4 to 6 range. And then Shrew's at 6. Again, I think Shrew's team's been a little too good to really get any higher. And then at 7, we have Trevor with Levi's pick. Trevor was really hoping when he made that Damian Pierce trade that this would be an early pick, but Levi has proved all this wrong this year. He was able to honestly turn around a pretty dead roster into a playoff contender in one offseason. So I don't think Trevor's getting another top six pick like he had hoped, but he's still got an extra first to play with. At 8 and 9, we have Ryan, since Ryan has his own and Mark's pick. Ryan's max points is still kind of low. Like he'd absolutely could catch up to second at this point if he sold off a few players. And even with Diggs' injury and like Kareem Hunt maybe not playing into the near future, he might not even need to sell off anyone. So we'll see what happens there. We have Stun at the 10th pick, me at 11, and Chaz at 12. We also have our picks, and we are currently top three in the standings, so that's where the chips lie there. But yeah, I mean, right now, if you're looking at the draft board, I mean, Trevor, Beans, and Ryan have most control over what's going on in the draft right now. I think the three of them, if we look at draft picks as a whole, can own the most draft picks collectively. So the draft right now, the last 2 years, the draft has run through Levi. Bit of a changing of the guard. Draft's now running through Trevor, Beans, and Ryan. We'll see if any of them are able to accumulate any more picks, or if even like a team like Logan or Jake or Sokol could possibly get some more picks into the first round. We also had a trade that happened last night. I received Jameis Winston from Trevor for a 2026 third. I think Trevor's motivations here are pretty easy. Jameis is starting. Trevor doesn't want points on his roster. Jameis has got to go. And a third, it could be, I mean, it's kind of a random third in 2026. We don't really know where Sokol's team is going to fall yet, but that's the third Trevor told me he wanted. And I think I had 4 on my team at the time. So Trevor's now got Sokol's third in 2026. And then I acquired Jameis Winston. And I had several different reasons why I was interested in doing this. One being no one else is going to have him now. I have Jameis, and I really don't feel like I paid that steep of a price to acquire another quarterback. I am starting to gear up for the playoff run. I think Jameis is, with the way he played last week against the Ravens, has proven that he could be a startable quarterback in the playoffs, fantasy playoffs, that is. I mean, should I get there, which I think I will. So it's just building up a little bit of depth. And I've had a kind of an excess of 2026 picks. So I really didn't mind shaking into that to start building, gearing up towards this playoff run. And then also, I think, I mean, this is a lot of this is me making a bet that Jameis Winston is going to be a bridge quarterback next year. With Aaron Rodgers being 40, 41 years old, don't really know how much he has left in the tank. And with the way the Jets season is gone, the Jets might move on. I don't really know what his contract looks like. But a lot of this is just like me hedging my bets for the future that Jameis plays well enough to earn himself a job as a bridge quarterback. I think a team like the Raiders, maybe the Colts, the Jets potentially. There's a lot of teams around the NFL that I think Jameis could slot into. I mean, he's been a pretty good fantasy producer. Even in his 30-30 season, he was QB4 that year. And then just like one teeny tiny reason was seeing Trevor beat Barbara last week. I really didn't want to have the same fate as a good old Barb. Giving up a third. I don't think there's taking on much risk there either. That's just like another tiny incentive for me to do it. But yeah, I had several reasons. The more I kept thinking about it, like I had sent Trevor a different offer, but then like the more I was thinking about it, I had all these reasons in my head continue to pile up, and it made sense for me, I think. And then a look at some of the upcoming matchups. I alluded to this first one earlier. I'm against Trevor this week. I'm expecting to win. If I lose, that's a complete and utter failure, in my opinion. But Barb did it last week. Anything is possible. I'm not going to overlook anyone, but I'd really like to beat Trevor. Next on this list here, we got Sokol taking on Levi. With Sokol, his matchup is pretty important for his season, I think. Again, like him and Levi are kind of fighting for one of those last playoff spots. And this is a pretty big spot for him. According to the projections that are on my screen here, he's favored, but projections don't mean shit. maybe some of these teams makes a trade in the next couple days, or different players go into the lineup. Who knows what'll happen? This is one where I'm really curious to see what happens because again, pretty big matchup for both of them. Win for Levi really distances himself from the teams in the chasing to make the playoffs. And then a loss for Sokol isn't quite a dagger, but a loss for Sokol here might need to get him considering potentially selling off a few players and trying to get the best pick possible. Next matchup, we have a nice rivalry here between Stun and Logan, the former roommates, longtime rivalry. Stun is a fairly big favorite here. I'm not sure if this includes a projection from Jordan Love or not, who might miss this week with injury. I still like Stun's team. I think his team's good. Like Darnell Mooney's wide receiver 12 right now. That was nothing I ever expected going into the season. Yeah, Cedric Tillman has brought some life to his taxi squad. Like Trevor, not Trevor. Stun has a really good collection of receivers on this team right now. Brian Thomas has been a wide receiver one. DJ Moore's fine. Pickens looks a lot better with Russ than he did with Fields. And then he still has JSN, Mooney, and Cedric Tillman, Yosavash, Michael Wilson, Calvin Ridley. Like Stun has a lot of really good receivers. And looking at his running backs, he does have Saquon. Tank Bigsby's been fine. He's been starting Dalton as a QB3, but Stun really doesn't have any RBs in the wings right now besides Tank Bigsby and Saquon. Jordan Mason's run is probably coming to an end or has come to an end with the 49ers on their bye this week. So maybe Stun trade some of these receivers for running backs. Who knows? Stun might just ride it out. I mean, it's been working for him so far. Why shake things up now? Next matchup we have on here is Mark versus Jake. Mark is currently a 20-point favorite over Jake. And again, a lot of that I think is some of the reasons I listed before with Jake's depth just not being great and being forced to start some suboptimal players. And also Mark's just got a filthy fucking running back room and a pretty filthy receiver room. And really Mark seems just strong across the board. I'm expecting Mark to win this one. Again, similar to what I said about Sokol, a loss for Jake here probably ends his season. So we'll see. And then another matchup where, again, a loss might end the season. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but it's Shrew against Chaz. Don't really know what's going to happen in this one. Chaz has been pretty strong all season, but apparently Barbara is favored to win here by about 9. The projections don't mean shit. Chaz's last week without CMC is probably this week. And so adding CMC into the lineup will be a much needed addition. Jaden Reed's had a few down weeks in a row now. And Pittman probably gets a lot more relevant with Flacco behind center at quarterback. But yeah, I mean, Chaz's quarterback room right now is Baker, Darnold, Russ, and Gino. He's got 4 pretty good options at quarterback. I mean, Baker's been, I think, QB2. I have to check the exact number, but I'm pretty sure he's QB2 right now. And Darnold's been like on a per game basis around QB12. Russ has been phenomenal. Gino's been phenomenal. Like Chaz really has this strong room of quarterbacks. And really, I think maybe not shake things up, but look to add to get some more help at running back or receiver, trading away one of them. I mean, I'm not going to say that Chaz shouldn't or has to do that, but might be a good call. But yeah, this is a really big matchup for Barb. Like I mentioned with the other 3 and 5 teams, a loss here might be a season ender. So who knows what'll happen? We'll find out at the end of the week. And then the last one's the Battle of the Brothers with Beans and Ryan. Right now, it's projected to be about a toss-up. Beans is only starting 1 quarterback right now. Like I mentioned earlier, Ryan, who knows who Ryan's going to be starting those last couple flexes. A win for Ryan probably it doesn't solidify a playoff spot, but it's 6-3. It's probably pretty damn close. Like I said before, I think 7 wins gets you in, 8 almost assuredly gets you in. So we'll see if what Ryan does if he gets the win here. And then same with Beans. If Bean lost by Beans here, probably ends his season because he'll be 3-6. So I know I talked about last week on the show about all the 3 and 5 teams needing a big win here. Looking at the schedule this week, all the 3 and 5 teams are facing a team currently in the playoffs. And then two of the teams in first and or in second and third with me and Stun are both playing the 2 and 6, Trevor and Logan respectively. So every matchup right now is a playoff team versus a non-playoff team. And I think this might be a week where after this week we start to see teams make a pivot into one direction or another. We'll see what happens. And then lastly, I want to just redo a midseason power rankings. I want to review what I said before the season started and then what I would change now. So before the season, I had Mark at 1, I had Corn at 2, I had Shrew at 3, Sokol at 4, Chaz at 5, Jake at 6, Stun at 7, Logan at 8, Ryan at 9, Levi at 10, Beans at 11, and Trevor at 12. And what would I change today? So I think the one of the biggest jumps is Chaz. I have going from 5 to 1. Baker, when I trade him to Chaz, I thought I was selling high on Baker a little bit. I mean, he was QB 10 last year, and I just didn't see him having much more upside than that. Obviously, I was very wrong. I do think that trade has been very much a win-win for both of us. I'm not going to complain about having Nico Collins, and I don't think he's going to complain about having Baker. It solidified his quarterback room and it solidified my receiver room. So I think that one's been overall win-win. But yeah, I mean, Chaz is in first, and he's been doing it all season without CMC. So adding CMC to Chaz's team is kind of scary. So it's why he's my front runner. And then I was pretty torn between me and Mark here at 2 and 3. I decided to put Mark ahead of me. And again, it's because his running back room is absolutely filthy with Derrick Henry, Kyron, and Gibbs. That is a pretty scary running back room. And to think it did have James Cook at one point as well. Mark's got a pretty filthy running back room. He's got a filthy receiver room. His quarterback room with Mahomes and Tua, like on paper, should be better than what it's been. They've been fine. They've been pretty average. Average might not be good enough, but I think for Mark's case, both of them still have a high enough ceiling, and there's still a lot of season left. I think Mark will be a-okay. Andrew's bouncing back has been pretty nice for Mark as well. And then, yeah, with Mark in second, that puts myself in third. And again, a big reason why I have myself in third behind Mark is the strength of his running back room. Achan's been good. He's been good since Tua's been back. I think he still is top 5 running back with Tua at quarterback. I mean, he's their receiver, number 2 receiver right now. I think he's second on the team in both receptions and targets. I'd have to fact check that though. At least he's been catching a lot of passes with Tua at quarterback. And then Aaron Jones has been a pretty solid running back. But ETN, Ford, Singletary were all guys I thought were going to be able to play bigger roles for me this year than they've been able to. And that's led my depth be a little more tested than I would have thought. I thought I had a pretty solid bench going into the year, and I was pretty content with it. But I mean, things change fast in fantasy football. And then at receiver, I currently have both Mike Evans and Nico Collins on. They're both injured, both going to be out. I mean, probably one more week for Nico, hopefully. And then Evans is probably out for 3 or 4 more weeks still. So it's really hard for me to put myself above Mark when I just think that his overall starting lineup, top to bottom, currently looks better. And come playoffs, if my team's healthy, I would maybe switch that around. But as things currently stand, I don't think I can put myself over Mark. And then up next in fourth, I have Levi. Levi, I think, makes the biggest jump in these standings in my power rankings. I had him 10th before the season, and now I have him at 4. James Cook and Joe Mixon have been great acquisitions for Levi at running back. I mean, they're both running backs for 2 of the best offenses in football. Not too shocked to see that he's been able to get a lot out of them. And Mixon especially has been phenomenal this year. He made a pretty aggressive trade to get A.J. Brown, who I think's a top 6-7 receiver. Really good. T. Higgins he's been good when he's played. He's just had some of those soft tissue injuries ailing throughout the season, missing a few weeks here and there. Then yeah, Drake May has been really good this year, and so is Bo Nix, especially Bo Nix. I was probably lower on than most on Bo Nix going into the draft, but I've been proven wrong. Bo Nix actually looks like a competent NFL quarterback, and I mean, I knew he had a decent rushing floor on a week to week basis. I mean, I think he was like hit like almost 60 rushing touchdowns in college. I might be making that number up, but like Bo Nix was much more of a rushing quarterback than I think people were talking about, at least in terms of his fantasy upside. And so, yeah, Levi re-rolled on his quarterbacks in this past year. Okay, he had 38 rushing touchdowns in college as quarterback, but 38 in 5 seasons as a starter. I mean, you're looking at, I'm good at math, 8 rushing touchdowns a year. That's pretty good. Like, if he's doing that in 12, 13 games, that's almost two-thirds of a rushing touchdown a game. That's a pretty nice floor to be baked into a quarterback. Then yeah, his tight end room. I would really look at trading for someone if I were Levi. I mean, Chig and Brenton Strange have been bodies to put in there. Not that I think he really needs a tight end to contend. I mean, last year Chaz and I made it to the finals with Ferguson and Pat Fryermuth as our starters. But I mean, if you have a guy put in someone who's averaging 7, 8 points a game instead of someone probably averaging 3 or 4, just all those little points I think could incrementally add up. And he does have some, I think, excess depth at receiver right now where he could maybe trade one of those receivers into a tight end. Behind Levi, I have Shrew. I think I touched upon this earlier. Shrew's got a great running back room. Receiver room is not as good as I initially thought. Got great tight ends though, which honestly both Njoku and Bowers have been playing like receivers. So I think he's been fine there. Quarterback with Stroud and Caleb. I mean, I don't think they're producing as expected, but again, both still really young. Stroud's a pocket passer, so a lot of that relying on just yards and touchdowns. If he's not getting it done as much through the air, and I think a lot of that's been because of Nico's injury, he's just like not been what he was built up to be. But I still think he'll be a very solid quarterback for the future, obviously. But yeah, I think the biggest reason why I have Shrew behind Levi is Levi's team on a week to week basis has just been a lot more consistent. And that really was the tiebreaker for me. I guess if I were to tier it, like I would have Chaz mark myself in like a top tier. And then Levi would like start that second tier of contenders where I think it's like Levi, Shrew, and Stund. Yeah. I touched upon this earlier with Stund's team. I mean, Stund's team's fucking loaded at wide receiver. He completely changed his strategy from the running back army to the wide receiver army, and it's worked for him. I mean, he's been able to maximize a lot of those spike weeks that receivers can provide. And I still like Herbert and Lawrence more than consensus. I think they're not the greatest fantasy quarterbacks right now, especially Herbert. Although T Law has been pretty good the last like 3 or 4 weeks. Like he's been playing at a QB1 level, and Herbert's finally they're starting to let him sling the rock a little bit in LA. It's not just hardball, just ground and pound. So Stun, I think. I mean, I don't think he is going to finish sixth in our standings. If I were to wager, he's probably going to be top 3 or 4 just based on his current record. But I think if I were in a vacuum, if I were to make a pick for the playoffs, I would take all 5 teams ahead of him. Next one I have here is Sokol at 7. Like I mentioned before, I still really like Sokol's team. I think he has some really good receivers. I think Goff and Cousins are still a good quarterback duo to have. Monty's a good running back. Rashad White and Zach Moss are both fine at running back. Like Sokol's got I think, a good team. He's just not been on the right side of the ledger with wins. We'll see if he can turn it around. It's hard to say just because, like, again, I think his schedule is kind of tough. I have Ryan here at 8th. Burrow and Daniels is probably the best quarterback duo in the league. I don't know if and probably even like maybe even the best room altogether. He doesn't really have a QB3, but I don't think that's been Ryan's objective for this season necessarily is to win. He might need to acquire one at some point, but till then, I mean, Daniels is looking like it's going to be a fantasy gem for years to come. And then Burrow is a pretty good quarterback to have as your QB too. It honestly reminds me a lot of my quarterback room with Kyler and Dak, where we both have our like scrambler as our QB1. and then just both have are pretty solid pocket passers or QB2, both of but like higher ceiling pocket passers. And yeah, Ryan's running back room though. I mean, he has Swift. Swift has been. I've been a pretty known Swift hater. Swift actually has been very very good the last like 4 or 5 weeks now. I mean, I still don't think he's a particularly great running back in real life, but the Bears have figured out the right way to utilize him. Um, really not much. I fucking hate the Bears. Really not rooting for Swift to do well, but I will give my flowers where it's due. I mean, Swift's having a much better season than I was anticipating. I thought there was a real chance that he might have been able to be overtaken by Roshan or Khalil Herbert, but this regime clearly likes Swift in the lineup. And then, yeah, Ryan's receiver room. I mean, losing Diggs is a pretty big blow. Zay Flowers is good. He's in a low volume passing offense that has a ton of weapons. Hard for me to get excited about him if he's your wide receiver one, but like I think he's a great 2 or 3 to have on a team. Addison's been a little boom bust this year. I think a lot of that's just Darnold's not going to have an easy time supporting multiple pass catchers in that offense. And I still like Addison, the prospect and talent. He's fine. And then like he has Keon Coleman and Keenan Allen. Keon Coleman's been starting to emerge the last few weeks, looking like a pretty solid pick. And Laporta's taken a pretty big step back this year. And I'm not too shocked by that with the Lions having the emergence of JMO. And Laporta also led all tight ends and touchdowns by 4 last year. And like he was a good tight end last year. He averaged like 11 points a game. But it wasn't like a tight end one season we've seen in years past where like Kelsey averaging 17 points or like Kittle averaging like 14, 15 or like Waller averaging like 14 or 15. It was a good tight end one season, but it wasn't anything like outrageously good. And then the Lions are becoming a lot more ground to pound. They've been utilizing him more as a blocker. Porter's taken a bit of a step back. I still like Ryan's team a lot for the future. I mean, he's got really the only piece that I think won't be that's on here that's not going to be relevant next year is like Kareem Hunt and Keenan Allen. With all the draft picks Ryan has, I think he's really setting himself up to be strong next season. I think that's more of where his goal is anyway, but any wins coming along right now are fine. I have Jake in ninth. Like I kind of hit on all of these when I was earlier in the show. It's kind of what I'm realizing now. Just don't think Jake has enough depth to make a true playoff run. Probably needs to start splitting Hurts, Chase, and Harrison, splitting those guys into multiple pieces, and then just like getting just like more quality starters into the lineup. I know it's really tough to trade away a star. I mean, I myself really don't like trading away top end talent. Of Jake's lack of draft picks, it's in this year's draft, like at least lack of a first. It's going to be kind of hard for this team to get better, at least this season. But I think he could really retool himself to be fine next season. Jake moved down 3 spots initially. Again, I really like Jake's top 10, but just like after that top 10, it gets kind of gross. And we're starting to get to a point where that roster is looking a little gross. A lot of that was Cup was injured. He's healthy now, but I'm just not sure. I guess I didn't mention Sokol had fallen 3 spots in the rankings, and Shrew had also fallen a couple spots as well. And then the bottom 3, I have Beans, Logan, and Trevor. I really don't know how great I feel about playing Beans at 10 now that I'm redoing this. I had him at 11 before the season, which I think was accurate, but McLaurin looks like a real wide receiver one with James Daniels at quarterback. And then Shaheed was having a really good year before he tore his meniscus. Downs is looking like a real like PPR menace. Sutton's fine as a wide receiver 4. I mean, Komet and Goddard have both been very solid tight end. Bijan's probably dynasty RB1. And then Chubb, Algier, Chase Brown, all been solid. Antonio Gibson in a spot start could be fine. I think Beans actually has a lot to be excited for next year. He has multiple firsts, and then he has Lamar, like especially since he has Jake's first too. Like he might have be looking at 2 top 5 picks. Has Lamar, JJ McCarthy, and then hopefully one of Fields or Levis starts next year. But if not, he'll be able to maybe use those first by someone else. But no, I like where Beans' team stands for the future. That just right now it's not going to turn to many wins. And then I have Logan at 11. I had Logan at 8 before the season. I think Logan was going to be operating on a pretty thin margin of error going into the season. He just doesn't. He just again really lacking draft picks. He kind of went all in with Josh Jacobs last season, and then he has some good running backs. Like Jacobs is good, James Conner is good, Najee's been fine. Uh, just like that receiver room is pretty gross with Amari Cooper as his one, and then Tyler Lockett as a two. Ray McLeod, I think, is his wide receiver three right now, which isn't great. I mean, it's pretty clear what Logan needs in the draft. He's got Love and Purdy. I mean, holding down that quarterback room for years to come, but one of those things where I lost my train of thought. I got a message from Slack. Anywho, Logan's got Hawkinson coming back soon, and then he's got Kate Otten. Kate Otten, I think, is going to be really good these next few weeks. Perhaps could be a good trade target or trade candidate for Logan with Hawkinson coming back, as he could sell off Kate Otten with the way he's been playing and with the injuries the Bucks have in the passing game. Might be a pretty desirable trade candidate for a team that needs a tight end. Wink, wink. Uh, Hopefully, someone listening to this caught on to who I'm referring to. If it hasn't been obvious at this point. And then in last, I have Trevor. Trevor's got Josh Allen, Malik Neighbors, and yeah, that's Trevor's team. I mean, those are two great pillars to build around for the future. And Trevor has a lot of draft capital. And then I really think his running back room is honestly fine for this year in the future with Pacheco, Hubbard, Ramondre, Braylon Allen, Bucky Irving. Like that's a group of players who I think are all pretty solid, and like he really doesn't need to add too much more to that. Ashton Genty might be again sometimes just when you take the best player available. Yeah, I mean Trevor doesn't have a second quarterback. His wide receiver two right now is probably Xavier Legette, who I think is good. He's on the Panthers and he's a rookie. But Trevor's got a lot of promise for the future with the amount of draft picks he has. And I had him in 12th before the season, and there's absolutely nothing this season that's changed my mind from putting him in 12th. And I have no idea how long this show was. I think this was longer than most of the shows I've done. Maybe because I'm just talking to myself on Zoom, it's letting me have more than a 40-minute meeting. But thank you, everyone, for listening to the pod. Uh, don't forget to like and subscribe everywhere the podcast can be found, which is Spotify and YouTube. And love you all. Hope you all have a great week. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.